Sergeant Rachel Hayes had always been the quiet one. In a world of loud personalities and rigid hierarchies, she moved like a shadow, efficient, unnoticed, yet always observing. The Navy had trained her well. She could assess a situation in seconds, anticipate danger, and act decisively when no one else even noticed a problem existed. On that crisp November morning at Naval Station Norfolk, her instincts were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. The base was alive with the usual controlled chaos, mechanics scuttling between helicopters, guards patrolling in measured steps, clerks hustling with stacks of classified documents. But today, there was a different energy in the air, an undercurrent of tension that even the seasoned officers felt. The general, a high-ranking, no-nonsense figure with a reputation for demanding excellence, was scheduled to inspect the newly fortified rooftop command center. Rachel knew the kind of scrutiny this visit would bring. Every soldier, every piece of equipment, every protocol would be examined with the general's sharp eye. Rachel was in the supply corridor when she heard it, a faint, irregular hissing. Subtle, almost drowned out by the usual hum of the base, but there nonetheless. Her brow furrowed as she paused, head cocked, listening. She knew that sound, something mechanical, leaking pressure, or worse, a warning of impending danger. Her training kicked in. She moved toward the source, a small service hatch near the helicopter landing pad. Her boots made barely a sound against the polished concrete floor. Inside the hatch, hidden in the shadows beneath a steel beam, she spotted it. A small, inconspicuous device, wires coiled around a timer, a faint red light blinking. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't an accident. Someone had intentionally placed this device, and judging by its design, it could be deadly if triggered at the wrong moment. Rachel's pulse quickened. The general would be on that roof in less than 15 minutes. Seconds mattered. She reached for her radio to alert command, but a voice cut through the comms, sharp and authoritative. "Sergeant Hayes, report to HQ immediately. Unauthorized alarm protocol breach." Confused, Rachel hesitated. Unauthorized. She hadn't triggered any alarms yet. Her hands hovered over the device as her mind raced. The official channels were too slow, and waiting for backup could mean disaster. She knew that if she didn't act now, lives, including the general's, could be lost. Before she could decide, the hatch door rattled. Someone was approaching. Her instincts screamed that the device might be on a timer. She had to move, and fast. Taking a deep breath, Rachel carefully lifted the device, testing its weight, gauging the sensitivity of the wires. The tiniest misstep could ignite it. At that moment, a base technician rounded the corner. "Sergeant Hayes, what are you doing? Step back." His voice trembled, half in panic, half in disbelief. Rachel's eyes met his, and she shook her head. No time to explain. The general's life, and possibly dozens of others, depended on her acting immediately. She slipped the device into a fireproof satchel she carried for emergency protocols and sprinted toward the stairwell leading to the rooftop. Each step felt like an eternity. Adrenaline made her legs move faster than thought. She could hear shouts from below, but they were distant, irrelevant. The countdown in her mind was louder than any alarm. Emerging onto the roof, Rachel froze. The early morning fog clung to the edges, swirling around the newly installed helicopter landing pad. The device was secure for the moment, but the timer's faint ticking was unmistakable. The general's convoy was approaching, the distant roar of engines announcing his imminent arrival. Rachel's eyes scanned the perimeter. No one had noticed her presence yet. She had to act decisively. She placed the device near the edge of the roof, intending to toss it off if she couldn't disarm it fully in time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. The fine line between heroism and catastrophe stretched tight before her. Suddenly, movement at the opposite corner of the roof caught her eye. A shadow shifted unnaturally. Someone else was here. Someone with intent. Her heart raced faster. The plan she had rehearsed 100 times in training now became a dangerous improvisation. Whoever was tampering with this device wasn't going to wait patiently while she figured things out. From below, the crackling voice of the security captain echoed up. "Sergeant Hayes, step away from that device immediately." Protocol, rules, hierarchy. They all screamed at her to comply. But Rachel's gut told her that if she stepped away, the roof could become a scene of disaster within seconds. She bit back a response and focused. Every skill she had acquired in years of service crystallized into action. She knelt, carefully loosening wires, tracing the circuitry, assessing what kind of rig it was. This was no ordinary explosive. It was a sophisticated mechanism, likely designed by someone with knowledge of military operations and timing. The distant sound of the general's convoy grew louder. He was mere minutes away. Rachel's mind raced, calculating the time, the risk, the possible outcomes. If she didn't act, the consequences were unimaginable. If she did, she risked not only her life but her career. The decision was hers alone. Then the shadow shifted again. Her pulse thumped violently in her ears. The presence of another person, or possibly more, on the roof transformed this from a mechanical threat into a human one. Someone had planned this meticulously, counting on chaos, on protocol, on her hesitation. Rachel's instinct screamed. She could not hesitate. A sudden gust of wind lifted the fog, revealing the edge of the roof where she had set the device. The timing mechanism blinked red. She had less than 2 minutes. Sweat ran down her temple as she gritted her teeth. This was the moment. One precise, calculated move could avert disaster. She made her choice. With careful hands, she disarmed the device, cutting one wire, twisting another, her focus absolute. Every second stretched and contracted as the timer ticked down. Finally, with a quiet click, the device's light went dark. She exhaled sharply, relief flooding her in a wave she barely noticed, because there was no time to celebrate. From the stairwell, a voice called again. "Sergeant Hayes, you are in violation of direct orders. Return immediately." Rachel glanced down, knowing that disobeying orders could end her career. But for a moment she ignored it, allowing herself to glance toward the street below. The general's convoy was just arriving. The shadowy figure she had noticed moved, watching her. Someone had been counting on her failure. Her phone buzzed. A brief alert from base security. "All personnel be advised. Roof access protocol compromised. General approaching." Rachel's stomach tightened. The adrenaline, the fear, the knowledge of what could have happened, it all crashed into her. Yet in the middle of it, a strange calm settled over her. She had acted. She had made the choice to protect lives at the expense of her own comfort, her own career, and maybe even her safety. And then, as the first armored vehicle reached the base gate, a deep rumble echoed above her. Rachel's eyes shot up just in time to see the rotor blades of a Navy helicopter slicing through the morning fog, descending toward the roof. Her breath caught. She had just saved the general's life, or at least prevented disaster. But now, another unknown variable had arrived, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Her pulse steadied for just a second, but the hairs on her neck rose. The helicopter wasn't routine. Its timing was too precise. Someone or something was orchestrating every move, testing her, testing the system. And Rachel knew with a cold clarity that the next few minutes would define everything: her career, the general's life, and perhaps even the fate of the base itself. Cliffhanger. As Rachel took a tentative step back, trying to gauge the descending helicopter, her eyes widened in horror. Moving across the roof, hidden in the mist, the shadow from before was not alone. 2 figures now emerged, their intent unmistakable. They were coming for the device, and for her. Rachel's lungs burned as she crouched behind the rooftop's mechanical enclosure, heart hammering in her chest. The morning fog curled around the helicopter pad like a ghostly shroud, making the shadows seem larger, more menacing. The 2 figures she had spotted moments ago were moving with purpose, their motions deliberate. Every instinct in her body screamed that these were no ordinary base personnel. They were here for something far darker. She weighed her options. Standard protocol dictated that she step away, notify her commanding officer, and let the Explosives Ordnance Disposal (EOD) team handle the situation. That would have been the safe, rule-abiding move. But safe wasn't the priority anymore. The general's convoy was arriving below, armored vehicles rumbling closer to the base gate. Every second brought them nearer to the roof, nearer to the danger she had narrowly disarmed. Rachel tightened her grip on the fireproof satchel containing the device. The two intruders were closing in, scanning for her presence. Her eyes darted to the stairwell that led down to the base offices, too slow. The only cover was the mechanical enclosure, but it wouldn't stop them if they got close. She needed a plan fast. A sudden crackling voice echoed through the rooftop loudspeakers. "Sergeant Hayes, you are not authorized to engage. Step away from the device immediately." Rachel's stomach twisted. The captain's words weren't meant to warn her, they were meant to bind her hands. But she knew that if she obeyed, the consequences could be fatal. The general could step onto the roof at any moment, and these intruders weren't going to give him a courtesy warning. Swallowing her fear, Rachel made her decision. She would act. Moving with the precision of a trained operative, she shifted to a more concealed position behind the mechanical vents. Her eyes never left the two figures, whose dark uniforms and masked faces made them almost anonymous in the fog. One reached toward a concealed object near the roof's edge. Rachel's pulse spiked. Another device. A backup rig. Her hands shook slightly, but she forced herself to steady them. Every skill she had learned over years of Navy training, the fine motor precision, the rapid threat assessment, the calm under pressure, converged in this moment. She knew the first step was to neutralize the immediate threat. With a deep breath, Rachel leapt from her cover, tackling the nearest intruder to the ground. A grunt of surprise escaped his lips. She pinned him, feeling the surge of adrenaline that made her stronger, faster, sharper. But the second figure reacted instantly, drawing a small firearm. Rachel's mind raced. No time for hesitation. She grabbed the intruder's arm and twisted, forcing him backward into the steel railing. The gun clattered across the roof with a metallic echo that seemed impossibly loud in the fog. She snatched it up, scanning for the other intruder, but he had disappeared into the mist. The distant thrum of the helicopter grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat in the tense silence of the rooftop. Rachel glanced toward it. The blades were slicing through the fog now, casting long, revolving shadows across the roof. She didn't have time to wait for reinforcements. If the intruders were skilled enough to bypass security and plant a device, they wouldn't hesitate to strike again. She pressed herself against the enclosure, fumbling to remove the device from the fireproof satchel. The timer blinked faintly, though it had stopped counting down, perhaps triggered into a secondary state. Whoever had built this had anticipated interference. Whoever had planned this attack had wanted it to be a test, and she was now the variable in their experiment. The general's convoy had arrived at the base gate. She could see the armored vehicles below, the personnel moving with military precision. If she didn't act now, the inspection could turn into a catastrophe. She had to disarm the device completely and fast. Rachel pulled out her toolkit, hands working with incredible speed, cutting, twisting, and assessing each wire. She could hear the rotor blades beating faster above her, feel the vibrations through the rooftop's steel frame. The first intruder had recovered, lunging toward her again. She sidestepped, kicking him backward. His momentum carried him across the roof, and he hit the railing, tumbling toward the foggy abyss below. Her breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. She didn't have the luxury of relief. Every second mattered. And then she heard it, a sharp, deliberate click from the device. It had been activated remotely. The faint blinking red light intensified, and a low hissing began, a warning that whatever mechanism they had designed was preparing to engage. Rachel's stomach lurched. She had to finish disarming it, but the tools in her hands felt suddenly inadequate for the sophistication of the rig. Panic whispered at the edges of her mind, but she silenced it, focusing on her training. Logic, intuition, and adrenaline were all she had. Suddenly, the second intruder reappeared from the fog, moving with a speed and precision that suggested military or paramilitary training. He lunged toward the device. Rachel reacted instantly, shoving him aside and pinning him against the ventilation ducts. "Stay down," she hissed, adrenaline sharpening her voice. The intruder struggled, but Rachel's resolve was stronger. Her mind worked on multiple tracks: disarm the device, neutralize the threats, and protect the general. She knew she couldn't rely on anyone else. Orders were meaningless. She was alone in making life-and-death decisions. The helicopter landed, rotor wash sending clouds of fog swirling. Crew members disembarked, but they were focused on securing the perimeter, not the immediate danger on the rooftop. Rachel had seconds to act. She pulled the final wire, twisting it with surgical precision. Sparks flew briefly, and then silence. The device was disarmed. Rachel exhaled sharply, feeling a wave of relief wash over her, but it was fleeting. The intruders were still on the rooftop, and the helicopter's crew had not yet secured the area. She had won the battle, but the war was far from over. From behind her, a voice cut through the fog. "Sergeant Hayes, step away immediately. You are under direct orders to stand down." She didn't turn. She couldn't. Not when the general was just steps away, his armored convoy waiting below, unaware of the disaster she had narrowly prevented. She had disobeyed direct orders, risked her career, and endangered herself, but she had no other choice. The right action wasn't always the sanctioned one. As she crouched, scanning the fog for further threats, a faint alarm echoed from the base communications network, a warning about a potential secondary device. Her pulse quickened. She had handled one threat, but the danger wasn't over. Someone had planned this meticulously, and she was now a central figure in their plot. The general's arrival drew closer. She could hear the subtle rumble of his boots, the disciplined cadence of his team moving across the metal floor. Any second now, he would step into the area she had just cleared. Rachel knew that the next moments could define not only her life, but the lives of everyone on the rooftop. The shadow moved again, a ghostly figure emerging from the mist. Rachel tensed, ready for a confrontation. Her fingers grazed the tools, the device, and the edge of the roof. She had faced danger before, but never like this. Simultaneous threats, a ticking device, the highest-ranking officer on the base steps away, and time slipping like sand through her fingers. Cliffhanger. As the first armored vehicle reached the base gate, Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. The shadowy figure was not alone. A second silhouette emerged from the fog, moving toward the helicopter, toward the roof, and toward her. She realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the attack had only just begun, and her next move would determine whether she survived or became the first casualty. Rachel's muscles burned as she crouched low behind the mechanical enclosure, eyes darting between the descending helicopter and the shadowy figures closing in. Her pulse pounded like a drum, each beat a warning of the consequences that hung over her. She could feel the cold steel of the rooftop through her palms, grounding her as adrenaline sharpened her senses. Every instinct screamed that the next moments would determine who lived and who didn't. The first intruder she had neutralized was down, sprawled awkwardly across the rooftop, groaning. The second was moving with deadly precision, weaving through the fog with the fluidity of someone trained to kill. Rachel knew she couldn't afford a mistake. One wrong step could trigger the device again, or give the intruder a clear shot at her or the general. Her eyes flicked to the helicopter above. The rotor wash whipped the fog into chaotic spirals, momentarily obscuring the rooftop. The crew was focused on securing the perimeter, not the immediate danger she faced. Rachel had seconds, literally seconds, to act before the general reached the area. She gripped the device tightly in one hand, tools in the other, calculating her moves with surgical precision. The rig was still partially active. Although she had disabled its timer, any jolt or mishandling could trigger a fail-safe. She had never dealt with such a sophisticated device outside of simulations. Fear gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, but she pushed it aside. Survival, protection, and the imperative to act were louder than fear. The shadowy intruder lunged suddenly from the mist, his figure moving impossibly fast. Rachel reacted instinctively, using her training to shove him against the railing. The wind from the helicopter's blades buffeted both of them, making the struggle even more dangerous. His weight threatened to unbalance her, but she held firm, twisting him to the ground with a force born of desperation. Rachel barely had time to catch her breath. From below, she could hear the muted roar of the general's armored convoy moving into the base. The timing was perfect and terrifying. If the intruders succeeded, the consequences would ripple far beyond this rooftop. She pressed herself closer to the edge, scanning for any sign of another threat. Then she saw it. A second device, smaller, almost unnoticeable against the rooftop's steel surface, blinking faintly red. It had been planted while she had been distracted by the first intruder. Her stomach dropped. Whoever orchestrated this attack was meticulous, anticipating every contingency. Rachel's mind raced. She could disarm one device, but could she handle two, with enemies closing in and the general steps away from the armored safety of his convoy? Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. She acted without hesitation, moving toward the second device. Her fingers worked with precision, twisting wires and cutting connections with a skill born of countless hours of training and instinct. Sparks flew briefly from the first device she had disarmed, now fully inert, as if warning her to hurry. The second intruder lunged again, aiming for the device. Rachel sidestepped with reflexive speed, shoving him into the steel railing. The fog swirled around them, masking her movements. Every second was a battle between herself, the devices, the intruder, and time itself. Finally, with a precise motion, she cut the final wire on the secondary device. The faint hissing stopped. The red light blinked once and went dark. Rachel exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and adrenaline washing over her. Both devices were neutralized. But there was no time to celebrate. The general was steps away, moving toward the rooftop with a cautious, measured gait. He looked around, confusion flickering across his face as he took in the scene. The scattered intruders, the disarmed devices, the fog-choked rooftop. His eyes met Rachel's, a spark of recognition, subtle, almost imperceptible, but there nonetheless. Before she could respond, the captain's voice crackled through the rooftop comms. "Sergeant Hayes, step away from the devices immediately. You are relieved of duty." Relieved of duty, Rachel's chest tightened. She had saved the general's life, prevented a catastrophic attack, and neutralized the threats. But now she was being punished for doing what no one else had the courage or the foresight to do. The absurdity of it stung, but she swallowed it. The immediate danger was over for now. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the first intruder stirring. He wasn't unconscious, just dazed. Rachel knew he could recover in seconds. Her mind raced. Disarm, protect, survive. The helicopter crew was moving into position, but they hadn't secured the rooftop yet. She had to buy time. With measured calm, Rachel approached the intruder. "Stay down," she said, her voice firm and commanding despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. He groaned but didn't move. She kept her eyes on him, every muscle tense, ready to react. The general approached, his gait cautious, eyes scanning the rooftop. He stopped a few feet from her, looking at the devices and the subdued intruder. "Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I hope I understand this correctly." Rachel nodded, struggling to catch her breath. "Yes, sir. Both devices were live. I disarmed them. The intruders, they're still here, likely part of a coordinated attack." He studied her for a long moment, silence stretching between them. And the chain of command. Rachel's stomach sank. I disobeyed direct orders, sir. I acted independently to neutralize the threat." The general's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "doing the right thing requires acting outside the rules." Her chest swelled with a mixture of relief and disbelief, but there was no time to dwell on it. The intruder was beginning to stir more purposefully, and the helicopter crew was still mobilizing. Rachel kept her focus, scanning every corner of the rooftop, every shadow, every movement in the swirling fog. Suddenly, the second intruder emerged from the mist, moving with lethal precision toward the device she had just disarmed. Rachel reacted instantly, shoving him to the ground and pinning him. His struggle was brief but intense. She used his momentum against him, twisting and locking him into place. The general observed silently, a calm authority in contrast to the chaos around him. Rachel could feel his presence, an unspoken acknowledgement of her courage and skill. She had acted decisively when everyone else hesitated. She had taken a stand when protocol demanded submission. The rotor blades of the helicopter beat overhead, a deafening rhythm that vibrated through the rooftop and her chest. The crew finally secured the perimeter, moving toward the intruders and the devices. Rachel's heart still raced, but she allowed herself the tiniest breath of relief. The immediate threat had been neutralized. But just as she relaxed slightly, a subtle beep echoed from her peripheral vision. She froze. The secondary device, thought to be inert, had reactivated faintly but unmistakably. Someone had tampered with it remotely. Rachel's stomach dropped. The attack wasn't over. Cliffhanger. Rachel's eyes widened as she realized the rooftop wasn't just a battleground. It was a trap. Every move she had made, every device disarmed, every intruder subdued had been anticipated. And now, with the general only steps away and the helicopter crew still mobilizing, Rachel knew that the next split second could mean life or death for herself, for the general, and for everyone on the rooftop. The deafening roar of the helicopter's blades filled the rooftop, slicing through the fog like a predator circling its prey. Rachel pressed herself against the mechanical enclosure, sweat dripping down her forehead, uniform clinging to her back. Every nerve in her body screamed in unison, "Stay sharp, act fast, protect the general." She could feel the vibrations of the rotor wash through the steel of the rooftop, shaking the loose wires of the devices she had just disarmed. From inside the helicopter, voices shouted orders over the cacophony of blades. "Secure the perimeter. Confirm all rooftop exits." Rachel recognized the tone, discipline, authority, and urgency. It was clear they were elite, trained to handle situations just like this. Yet even with them on site, she knew her job was far from over. The general's convoy had reached the base, armored vehicles lining up like a steel barricade. The soldiers moved with precision, eyes scanning the perimeters, unaware of the immediate danger lurking above them. Rachel's gaze flicked back to the shadowy intruders. The first intruder had recovered slightly, pushing himself off the rooftop with a groan, eyes wild with rage and confusion. The second figure was still on the move, weaving through the fog with calculated steps. Rachel knew she had to act. Every second counted. She moved swiftly, grabbing the tools and checking the devices one last time. Both had been disarmed, but subtle indicators told her that one or both could be reactivated remotely. She couldn't take the risk. Suddenly, the helicopter's side door swung open, and a tall, imposing figure leaped onto the rooftop. His uniform was crisp, authority radiating from every movement. Rachel instinctively recognized him as the senior officer in charge of the helicopter unit. "Sergeant Hayes," he barked over the rotor wash, "we have reports of hostile intruders on the roof. Are you secured?" Rachel lifted her hand, pointing toward the remaining intruder. "I've got one subdued," she shouted, voice cutting through the wind. "The second is still active, and there may be a secondary device. I disarmed the main threats, but they could be tampered with remotely." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Understood, keep him contained. We'll secure the area." Rachel didn't hesitate. She lunged toward the intruder, tackling him to the ground once more. He struggled fiercely, but she pinned him, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline and strength. The wind from the helicopter blades whipped her hair into her eyes, the fog swirling like smoke from an unseen fire. The rooftop had become a battlefield, and she was the lone soldier holding the line. Through the rotor wash, Rachel caught sight of the general ascending the stairs to the rooftop. His face was calm, controlled, but his eyes betrayed a flash of concern as he took in the scene. Guards flanked him, scanning the fog, but it was clear he didn't yet understand the full extent of the danger. Rachel's heart pounded. Every second mattered. The intruder she held was struggling, fists flailing, grunting with effort. She could see the tension in his movements, the raw determination to break free. One misstep, one loss of focus, and he could reach the devices, or worse, her. The helicopter crew moved with practiced precision, disembarking and securing the perimeter. One operator rushed to the edge of the rooftop, scanning for any additional threats or devices. Another moved to assist Rachel with the intruder, but she held firm, her grip unrelenting. "I've got him," she barked. "Stay focused on the perimeter." Above the din, the faintest beep echoed, a subtle, almost imperceptible signal from the secondary device. Rachel froze, eyes darting to the spot where it had been disarmed. Her stomach sank. Someone was attempting to reactivate it remotely. The realization hit her like a punch. This was no random attack. It was coordinated, calculated, and meticulously planned. Whoever had orchestrated this knew exactly what they were doing. The general stepped closer, flanked by his guards. His eyes scanned the rooftop, taking in the disarmed devices, the subdued intruder, and the swirling fog. He stopped a few feet from Rachel, his gaze locking onto hers. "Sergeant Hayes," he said calmly, voice carrying over the rotor wash, "explain what has happened here." Rachel's chest tightened. She was exhausted, adrenaline still coursing through her veins, but she forced herself to speak clearly, concisely. "Sir, 2 devices were planted on this rooftop. Both were live. I disarmed them. 2 intruders attempted to interfere, one of whom is currently subdued. There may be secondary threats or remote reactivation attempts." The general's eyes narrowed, absorbing every word. And chain of command. Rachel hesitated, knowing the consequences of her next words. "Sir, I acted independently. I disobeyed direct orders to step away from the devices. I judged immediate action necessary to protect lives, including your own." For a long moment, silence fell. The rotor wash, the fog, the tension, all seemed to suspend in a frozen tableau. Then the general's eyes softened slightly, a hint of acknowledgement. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "doing the right thing requires actions outside the rules." Relief surged through Rachel, but she didn't allow herself to relax. Her focus remained sharp. The helicopter crew was securing the perimeter, but there were still unknown variables. Secondary threats, hidden devices, more intruders. Any of them could turn a narrow escape into catastrophe. The subdued intruder beneath her groaned, attempting to push himself free. Rachel's grip tightened. She glanced to the other side of the rooftop, where the fog seemed denser, swirling unnaturally as if hiding movement. Her instincts screamed that this was not over. It never would be over, not while she remained a step ahead of someone who wanted her dead. One of the helicopter operators approached, nodding to Rachel. "Sergeant, perimeter is mostly secure. We'll handle extraction of the intruder and devices." Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. There's a secondary device. It may still be active. We need to confirm before anyone else moves in." The operator's expression hardened. "Understood. Stand by for backup." The general moved closer again, studying the rooftop. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you acted decisively under extreme risk. I will ensure your actions are properly recognized." Rachel's stomach tightened. Recognition was the last thing on her mind. Survival, securing the devices, and ensuring the general's safety were her priorities. Yet the acknowledgement stirred a strange mix of relief and anxiety within her. She had disobeyed orders, risked her career, and faced mortal danger. But in this moment, she was the linchpin holding chaos at bay. A subtle vibration beneath her feet drew her attention. The secondary device, thought to be neutralized, was beeping faintly again. She froze, heart hammering. Someone had tampered with it remotely. The realization hit her like ice. The rooftop wasn't just a battlefield, it was a trap. The helicopter blades continued to churn the fog into turbulent clouds, casting shifting shadows across the rooftop. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Every movement had been anticipated, every decision observed. The intruders were professional, calculated, and patient. This was no ordinary attack, it was a test, and she was the variable being evaluated. The general's gaze met hers again. "Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, almost to himself, "I hope I understand this fully. You've saved lives today, yet you risked everything in doing so." Rachel nodded, unable to speak immediately, adrenaline and exhaustion colliding in a storm of emotion. The intruder beneath her groaned, attempting to push himself free again. She adjusted her hold, muscles straining. Hanger. Suddenly, a faint, high-pitched beep resonated from the far edge of the rooftop. Rachel's eyes widened. Another device, smaller, more sophisticated, was hidden in the fog, blinking ominously, and she realized with a cold certainty that the attack had only just begun. The rooftop was far from safe, and the next moments would demand everything she had: skill, courage, and instinct. Rachel's heart pounded as she froze, staring at the faint, high-pitched blinking light from the far corner of the rooftop. The fog swirled around it, masking its shape, but instinctively she knew exactly what it was. A secondary device, smaller, more sophisticated, deadlier than the first. Whoever had orchestrated this attack hadn't just planned a distraction. They had engineered a layered trap, and she had unknowingly stepped into the most dangerous part of it. The helicopter's rotor wash beat against the rooftop, a relentless rhythm that shook the steel beneath her feet. Crew members shouted over the wind, securing the perimeter, moving cautiously toward the intruder she had pinned. But Rachel's attention was entirely on the secondary device. It pulsed with menace, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her hands went instinctively to her tools. Years of training surged through her. Every skill, every drill, every scenario she had run through countless times in simulations became a tangible, precise instinct. The device wasn't just wired. It had sensors, motion detectors, likely a remote activation system. One wrong move could trigger an explosion that would tear through the rooftop and anyone standing on it. A faint whistle of air caught her attention, and she turned just in time to see movement from the fog. Another intruder, smaller, quicker, more calculated than the first, was approaching from the opposite side of the roof. Rachel's breath caught. She had neutralized one threat physically, but she now faced a new variable, a living, trained operative determined to see her fail. "Not today," she muttered under her breath, adrenaline sharpening her focus. Every ounce of her training was about to be tested in a way no simulation could have prepared her for. She shifted to a crouched position, eyes locked on the secondary device. Her fingers moved deftly, probing wires, identifying circuits, calculating the safest path to neutralize it. The intruder was closing in, silent in the fog, but Rachel had anticipated this. She gripped a metal pipe at hand, ready to strike if he got too close. Time became a distorted concept. Seconds stretched and contracted, the rotor blades of the helicopter above beating out a mechanical heartbeat in her chest. Below, the general's convoy waited, unaware of the full extent of the danger. She couldn't risk anyone moving forward until the device was fully neutralized. One false step could mean disaster. Rachel's eyes flicked to the intruder. He was skilled, moving with precise timing, anticipating her every move. She felt a chill. This wasn't a random attack. These people had trained for situations exactly like this. Her muscles tensed as she prepared to defend herself while simultaneously working on the device. She lunged, pushing the intruder back with a controlled force, pinning him against the rooftop's edge. The wind from the helicopter tossed fog and debris, making every movement more difficult, more dangerous. He struggled, powerful and determined, but Rachel's grip was unwavering. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the focus that allowed her to remain calm under extreme stress. Glancing back at the secondary device, Rachel realized it was even more complex than the first. Tiny circuits glimmered beneath a protective casing, wires snaking in impossible patterns, and sensors she hadn't seen before blinked intermittently. Whoever built this had anticipated interference and redundancy. They wanted failure, wanted someone to hesitate. Her stomach tightened. This was no longer just an attack. It was a test of every skill, every decision, every ounce of courage she possessed. She took a deep breath, suppressing the fear gnawing at her. Logic, training, and instinct would guide her. She couldn't afford panic, not now. As she began working, twisting wires and carefully maneuvering around sensors, she felt the subtle hum of a timer embedded in the device. Her pulse quickened. The intruder beneath her groaned, attempting to break free, but she held him firmly, muscles straining against his weight. Each second felt like an eternity. Then a realization hit her like ice. She wasn't just facing physical threats. Someone was monitoring her. The subtle blinking patterns, the precision of the intruder's movements, and the sophistication of the device suggested remote oversight. She was being watched, tested, and manipulated. Her actions weren't just about survival, they were being measured, evaluated. Rachel's mind raced, calculating the next steps. She could disarm the device physically, but she also needed to anticipate potential remote reactivation. Her fingers moved with deliberate speed, cutting, twisting, and isolating circuits in a carefully choreographed pattern. Sparks flew briefly, but she ignored the fear clawing at her throat. The helicopter crew above began signaling to each other, attempting to coordinate with her without putting themselves in harm's way. Rachel acknowledged with subtle hand gestures, maintaining her focus on the device and the intruder. She couldn't risk the slightest distraction. Lives hung in the balance, her own, the intruder's, and the general's. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into seconds, she twisted the final wire. A faint hiss stopped and the blinking red light went out. The secondary device was neutralized. Rachel sank to her knees, chest heaving, sweat soaking her uniform. Relief surged through her, but it was short-lived. Through the fog, movement caught her eye. Another figure previously hidden emerged from the shadows. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't over. The rooftop, the fog, and the descending helicopter had created a battlefield, and Rachel was still at its center. The attackers had planned meticulously, anticipating every step, but she had outmaneuvered them so far. Her eyes flicked toward the general, who was still approaching cautiously. He had seen the chaos, the intruders, the devices, but he didn't yet realize the full scale of the danger. Rachel knew she had to communicate quickly, efficiently, and convincingly to ensure no one made a fatal mistake. "Sir," she shouted over the rotor wash, "both devices have been disarmed. 2 intruders are contained, but there may be additional threats. The rooftop is not fully secure." The general's eyes narrowed. "Understood, Sergeant, stay sharp." Rachel's heart raced, but she didn't relax. She moved to the edge of the roof, scanning for any further anomalies while keeping a firm grip on the subdued intruders. The fog swirled like a living entity, hiding threats, amplifying uncertainty. Every shadow, every flicker of movement could signal danger. She realized with cold clarity that this was only the beginning. Whoever had orchestrated the attack had more planned: secondary teams, additional devices, contingencies she hadn't anticipated. Her actions had prevented disaster, but the full scope of the threat was still unknown. Cliffhanger. Rachel's eyes widened as a faint, electronic pulse emanated from the fog near the helicopter landing zone. It was rhythmic, deliberate, another device, or perhaps a new threat entirely. She understood instantly. The rooftop was not just a battlefield, it was a trap, and the next move could determine life or death for everyone above the base. The fog clung to the rooftop like a suffocating blanket, swirling around Rachel's boots as she crouched beside the subdued intruders. Every muscle in her body screamed in exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. The faint hum of the helicopter above mingled with the subtle pulse of distant electronic signals. Somewhere in that mist, another threat was alive, and Rachel could feel it, like the cold brush of a predator's claws against her consciousness. She glanced at the general, who stood a few feet away, his guards scanning the fog with precision. His calm, authoritative demeanor belied the tension radiating from the rooftop. Even he seemed uncertain of the full scale of what had unfolded, and she knew the attackers had planned it that way. Every detail had been orchestrated, every step calculated to create maximum confusion and fear. A sudden beep echoed faintly from the far edge of the rooftop. Rachel's pulse quickened. Another device, or was it an attempt to remotely trigger the disarmed ones? Her mind raced, analyzing, calculating, anticipating. There was no margin for error. She signaled to one of the helicopter crew with a sharp hand gesture. "Check that corner. Keep eyes open for devices or threats." The operator nodded and moved cautiously, weapon ready, scanning the fog. Rachel's fingers itched for her tools, but she had to maintain situational awareness. Then movement from the mist caught her eye, a shadow slipping silently toward the edge of the helicopter pad. Her stomach sank. This wasn't one of the intruders she had already subdued. Someone else was here, someone professional, someone trained to move in the fog and exploit every opening. Rachel shifted her stance, keeping low, hand near her sidearm. The intruder's movements were calculated, deliberate. She recognized the pattern, military or paramilitary training. Every muscle in her body tensed. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was personal. Someone wanted her, and the general dead. The helicopter blades beat a relentless rhythm overhead, whipping the fog into chaotic swirls. Crew members shouted instructions, coordinating movements, but the noise and wind made communication difficult. Rachel realized that the rooftop had become a labyrinth, every shadow a potential threat, every movement a potential trigger. Her gaze returned to the subdued intruders. They were no longer an immediate threat. They had been contained, but they had been part of a larger plan. Whoever orchestrated this attack had resources, intelligence, and patience. This was not random. It was methodical, designed to test her limits. Suddenly, the shadow from the mist lunged forward, a glint of metal flashing in the faint light. Rachel reacted instinctively, diving to the side and pushing herself low. The figure stumbled slightly, giving her a fraction of a second to assess the threat. It was a new intruder, armed and dangerous, moving with precision, likely expecting her to hesitate. Rachel's mind raced. She had neutralized 2 devices, subdued multiple intruders, and safeguarded the general. But this was a new challenge, one that required split-second decisions. She had to protect herself and the general, all while navigating the rooftop like a chessboard where every move could be fatal. She lunged, using her body weight to push the intruder against the metal railing. They grappled briefly, the force of the struggle amplified by the rotor wash from the helicopter above. Sparks flew as the figure's weapon scraped against steel. Rachel's fingers clenched around the intruder's arm, twisting and pinning him with precise control. The faint electronic pulse from earlier intensified slightly, and Rachel realized with a jolt that a secondary device had been activated or reactivated remotely. Her stomach dropped. The intruder's movements had been timed perfectly to coincide with this signal. Someone was orchestrating every action on the rooftop with a terrifying precision. "Sergeant Hayes," the helicopter operator shouted, voice cutting through the wind. "We need to secure that device now." Rachel nodded sharply, glancing at the blinking red light emerging from the fog near the helicopter pad. She knew there was no time for hesitation. She had to disarm it quickly, but the intruder beneath her still struggled, forcing her to split focus between threat containment and device neutralization. With precise coordination, she pushed the intruder down, using her weight and training to immobilize him. Her fingers moved deftly over the device, tracing wires, isolating circuits, calculating the safest sequence to disarm it. Every muscle, every nerve, every ounce of her focus was dedicated to the task. One wrong move, and the rooftop could become a scene of devastation. The general observed quietly, stepping cautiously, flanked by his guards. His eyes betrayed a mix of respect and concern, silently acknowledging Rachel's courage and skill. She had acted decisively where others might have frozen, and that split-second decision-making had saved lives. Rachel's hands worked quickly, cutting a wire here, twisting a circuit there, carefully avoiding the sensors she had identified earlier. Sparks flickered briefly, then ceased. The device's faint blinking light went out. She exhaled sharply, relief mixing with exhaustion. One threat neutralized, but the rooftop still held danger. From the mist, another figure emerged, a third intruder, faster and more agile than the previous two. Rachel's stomach tightened. She had faced multiple threats, but this one moved with lethal intent, seemingly anticipating her every action. The rooftop was no longer just a battlefield, it was a trap, and she was at its center. Her eyes locked on the intruder, calculating movement, predicting intent. She couldn't rely solely on brute force. Strategy, timing, and precision would determine survival. She shifted, keeping low, hand poised to strike, every sense hyper-alert. The helicopter crew moved to intercept, weapons trained, but Rachel knew they couldn't reach the intruder in time. She had to act first. With a swift, precise motion, she lunged, twisting the intruder's arm and leveraging his momentum to send him stumbling into the fog. He caught himself on the railing, recovering quickly, but the brief distraction bought her precious seconds. Rachel turned to the secondary device, checking for reactivation signals. None. For now, it appeared secure, but she knew better than to relax completely. Whoever had planned this attack had contingencies, backup plans, and hidden devices. The rooftop was a chessboard, and she had only won a few moves in a complex game. The general approached cautiously, his expression unreadable but his posture commanding. "Sergeant Hayes," he said calmly, "your actions today have been extraordinary, but tell me, are we truly safe?" Rachel shook her head slightly, eyes scanning the fog for any subtle movement. "Not yet, sir. There may be additional threats. The devices were sophisticated, possibly remotely controlled. The intruders are trained, coordinated, and patient. We need to secure the entire perimeter before anyone moves." He nodded, acknowledging the gravity of her assessment. "Understood. We'll coordinate with your lead. Stay with me." Rachel's pulse remained high, but she forced herself to focus. The rooftop was far from secure, and every second mattered. She had acted decisively, but she couldn't underestimate the attacker's planning or resolve. Cliffhanger, Rachel's eyes widened as a faint, rapid beeping emerged from the fog near the helicopter's tail. Another device, smaller, more concealed, and potentially deadlier than the others, was active. She realized with a chilling certainty that the attackers had anticipated every move she had made. The rooftop was not just a battlefield, it was a carefully orchestrated trap, and the next few seconds would determine life or death for everyone above the base. Rachel's chest heaved as she crouched behind the mechanical enclosure, eyes locked on the faint red pulse flickering from the far edge of the rooftop. The last device, smaller, more sophisticated, and seemingly more lethal than anything she had faced so far. Her fingers ached from hours of precise work, but exhaustion was a luxury she could not afford. Every second was precious. The fog twisted and churned around her, a ghostly shroud that masked movement, hid dangers, and amplified every sound. Even the steady thrum of the helicopter blades above became a sinister accompaniment to the tension on the rooftop. Rachel's senses were stretched to their absolute limits. One misstep, one lapse in focus, and the consequences would be catastrophic. She glanced briefly at the general, who stood a few feet away, his guards scanning the perimeter with meticulous precision. He looked calm, authoritative, but Rachel knew better. He had no idea just how close the rooftop had come to disaster in the past hours. The devices, the intruders, the fog, all of it created a perfect storm that could have killed dozens in moments. Rachel exhaled sharply, steadying her trembling hands. The first step was containment. The intruder she had pinned earlier had recovered slightly and was testing her grip, muscles straining, eyes wild with fury. She tightened her hold, forcing him down, aware that the slightest slip could allow him to reach the device or escape entirely. And then she saw it. Another figure emerging from the fog, moving with silent precision. A fourth intruder, smaller, faster, more agile than the others. Rachel's stomach tightened. Whoever had orchestrated this attack had planned for contingencies. They had layered the threat, anticipating her every move. The rooftop was no longer just a battleground. It was a calculated trap designed to push her to the edge. Her eyes flicked back to the final device. It pulsed faintly, almost teasingly, as if daring her to act. Rachel knew she had to neutralize it, but the intruders were relentless. Every second spent on the device increased the risk of confrontation. Every moment lost could cost lives. With a swift glance, she calculated her moves. She couldn't rely solely on brute strength. Strategy and precision would determine survival. Using the intruder beneath her as leverage, she twisted his arm sharply, forcing him to stay pinned. Then she lunged toward the device, tools in hand, fingers trembling with a mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. The intruder from the mist lunged at the same moment, weapon raised. Rachel reacted instinctively, deflecting the strike and using his momentum to push him back. He stumbled, regaining his balance just in time to circle around for another attempt. Her mind raced. She couldn't afford a prolonged struggle. She had to neutralize the device now. Rachel's fingers worked rapidly, identifying circuits, twisting wires, isolating components. Sparks flickered briefly, a warning that she was on the edge of triggering the device. She ignored the fear clawing at her throat, focusing solely on precision. One wrong move, and the rooftop would erupt in a catastrophic explosion. The general's voice cut through the rotor wash, calm but commanding. "Sergeant Hayes' status." Rachel shouted over the noise, voice sharp and controlled. "Final device active, sir. Neutralizing now." He nodded, stepping cautiously, guards flanking him. "Do whatever it takes. Lives are on the line." Her hands moved with practiced precision, slicing, twisting, and reconnecting wires in a calculated sequence. The intruder beneath her groaned, attempting to break free, but she held firm, muscles straining. Every sense was alert, sight, sound, touch, focused on the delicate work of disarming the device. A sudden whistle of air drew her attention. The intruder from the mist had recovered, circling, searching for an opening. Rachel anticipated his movement, pivoting, using her body to block him while maintaining focus on the device. The sequence she had memorized in training now became second nature, a dance between threat containment and technical precision. Sparks flickered again, but the device did not detonate. Rachel exhaled sharply, moving to the final wire. One careful twist, one precise cut, and the threat would be neutralized. She froze for a fraction of a second, calculating, ensuring no hidden sensors would trigger remotely. Then, with a deliberate motion, she severed the wire. The device's pulse ceased. Silence fell over the rooftop, broken only by the fatting rotor wash. Relief surged through Rachel, but she didn't relax completely. The fog still concealed potential threats, and she knew better than to assume victory was absolute. The intruders were neutralized, one pinned beneath her, one pushed into the fog, and the others nowhere in sight. But Rachel's instincts screamed that the danger was not entirely gone. Someone had orchestrated this attack with meticulous planning, and she was still in the center of it. The general stepped closer, observing the aftermath. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, voice calm, "you've saved lives today. Beyond protocol, beyond orders, you acted decisively when others hesitated." Rachel exhaled, muscles relaxing slightly. "Thank you, sir, but we need to sweep the rooftop completely. There may still be hidden devices or intruders." He nodded. "Understood, secure the area, we'll coordinate with command." The helicopter crew moved methodically, scanning the rooftop with sensors, confirming that the devices were neutralized. Rachel remained alert, scanning the fog, aware that victory had been hard-won and could be fleeting. As the sun broke through the fog, casting long shadows across the rooftop, Rachel allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The fear, adrenaline, and tension that had gripped her for hours began to ebb slightly, replaced by a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. She had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. But then a faint, mechanical whine echoed from the far edge of the rooftop. Rachel's eyes widened. Another device. Or had the attackers anticipated even this, embedding a fail-safe triggered by her actions? She froze, muscles tensing, aware that even in victory, the danger could persist. The general observed her reaction, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, almost to himself, "if you've survived this rooftop, you can survive anything." Rachel's heart raced again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what she had endured. She realized that her actions had not only saved lives, they had demonstrated courage, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to duty. The rooftop had tested every limit, every instinct, and she had survived. Cliffhanger. As Rachel moved to secure the last intruder, the faint whine intensified, accompanied by a subtle vibration beneath her feet. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The rooftop was not just a battlefield. Someone had left one final contingency. And in the shadowed fog, Rachel realized with cold certainty. The attack was not entirely over, and the next seconds could determine whether she, the general, and the helicopter crew would survive the final, deadly twist. The faint whine beneath Rachel's feet grew louder, a mechanical pulse vibrating through the steel rooftop. Her stomach tightened. She knew instantly this wasn't just a leftover signal. It was a contingency device, smaller, concealed, and deadly. Someone had planned for her actions, anticipating each move she had made over the past tense hours. The general's voice cut through the rotor wash, calm but commanding. "Sergeant Hayes, status report." Rachel's voice was steady, controlled despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Sir, secondary device active. I need to neutralize it immediately. The intruder is contained, but the rooftop isn't fully secure." He nodded, a subtle flicker of concern crossing his normally composed face. "Do whatever it takes. Lives are on the line, including mine." Rachel's mind raced. She had disarmed multiple devices, neutralized intruders, and safeguarded the general, but this last contingency demanded split-second decision-making. She had only moments. The helicopter above hovered lower, blades chopping through the fog, stirring it into chaotic swirls that obscured vision and created a ghostly battlefield. Rachel saw a faint shadow move near the edge, another intruder, agile, smaller, perhaps one final attempt to disrupt her efforts. She lunged with precision, pinning him against the railing. His movements were fast, trained, and relentless, but she leveraged every ounce of strength and skill, twisting his arm and forcing him down. Sparks flew as his weapon scraped against steel, the friction a sharp reminder of how close the danger truly was. The pulse beneath her feet grew insistent, rhythmic, warning her that the device was primed. Rachel's fingers moved deftly, tracing wires, isolating circuits, cutting sequences she had memorized from hours of intense experience. She worked with surgical precision, knowing that a single mistake could destroy the rooftop and everyone on it. Through the fog, she saw the helicopter crew moving strategically, weapons trained, scanning the perimeter. They were elite, trained for high-stakes operations, but they couldn't intervene directly on the device without risking detonation. She had to act, and fast. Sweat dripped down her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she ignored it. Her focus was absolute. Logic, training, and instinct converged as she identified the key wire, a delicate, almost invisible connection. One careful cut and the threat would end. She paused for a fraction of a second, assessing for sensors, fail-safes, and remote triggers. Then, with a deliberate motion, she severed the wire. The device emitted a faint spark and went silent. Silence descended over the rooftop, broken only by the fatting rotor wash and the distant murmur of the general's convoy below. Relief surged through her body, but Rachel didn't move immediately. Her instincts told her to stay vigilant. The fog still concealed potential threats, and the rooftop had become a carefully orchestrated trap. She scanned every shadow, every corner, every flicker of movement. The general stepped forward, eyes sharp, observing the devices, the intruders, and Rachel's tense posture. "Sergeant Hayes," he said quietly, voice carrying authority and respect, "you've acted decisively under extreme risk. You've saved lives today that would have been lost without your intervention." Rachel allowed herself a brief nod, muscles still tense from the adrenaline and exertion. "Thank you, sir, but we need to secure the intruders and sweep the rooftop completely. There may still be hidden threats." He nodded again, then gestured toward the helicopter. "We'll handle extraction. You've earned your moment, Sergeant, but the operation isn't over until everyone is accounted for." The helicopter crew moved with precise coordination, securing the restrained intruders and checking the devices. Rachel remained alert, scanning the fog, knowing that vigilance could not be abandoned. The attackers had been meticulous, professional, and patient. They might have left additional surprises. Suddenly, the fog parted slightly, and a faint signal caught Rachel's attention, a subtle vibration near the edge of the helicopter landing zone. She tensed, eyes narrowing. But this time, it wasn't a device. It was the unmistakable sound of a Navy SEAL team rappelling down, landing strategically on the rooftop. Their presence changed everything. The general's expression shifted to acknowledgement and relief. "They've arrived. Sergeant, you've held the line." Rachel exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing fractionally. She had been the first line of defense, the one who acted when rules demanded hesitation. The Navy team moved quickly, securing the perimeter and ensuring no additional devices were active. Within minutes, the rooftop was confirmed secure. The helicopter hovered, blades whipping the fog away, revealing the full extent of the rooftop and the tense battlefield. The intruders were contained, devices neutralized, and the threat eliminated. Rachel allowed herself a moment to absorb it, the culmination of hours of tension, adrenaline, and near-catastrophic danger. The general approached, flanked by his guards. His gaze met Rachel's, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, voice steady, "today you acted beyond the call of duty. Not because you were ordered, but because you understood the stakes. You saved lives, including mine." Rachel's chest tightened, emotions mixing with the exhaustion. "Sir, it was my responsibility. I couldn't wait for orders. The devices, the intruders, they required immediate action." He nodded, eyes softening slightly. "Sometimes the right choice isn't the sanctioned one. Today, your judgment, courage, and skill made the difference between survival and disaster. You've earned every recognition for your actions." Rachel allowed herself a brief smile, the tension easing slightly, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. The fog began to lift, sunlight breaking through, illuminating the rooftop and revealing the chaos that had unfolded. The helicopter crew coordinated with the Navy SEAL team to extract the intruders safely. Rachel watched as the captured threats were secured, equipment checked, and every potential hazard accounted for. The rooftop, once a battlefield of shadows, fog, and deadly devices, was now under control. As she looked toward the general, he gestured to the helicopter. "Sergeant, it's time to move down. Your actions have not only saved lives but have also set a standard of courage and decisiveness that will be remembered." Rachel nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. The adrenaline still lingered, but the immediate danger had passed. She followed the general and the Navy team to the helicopter, scanning the rooftop one last time, ensuring no threat remained. As the helicopter lifted off, rotor wash dispersing the remaining fog, Rachel allowed herself to reflect. Hours of tension, Near-death encounters and split-second decisions had culminated in a victory that felt both surreal and earned. She had defied orders, faced meticulous adversaries, neutralized deadly devices, and safeguarded the general, all in the span of a few heart-pounding hours. The general turned to her, voice quiet but firm. "Sergeant Hayes, what you did today, not everyone could have done it. Not everyone would have had the courage to act when the rules demanded inaction. You've set a standard, a mark of true service." Rachel exhaled, muscles finally relaxing as the helicopter soared above the base. Relief, pride, and exhaustion collided in a storm of emotion. The danger was over, but the weight of what she had done would linger. The realization that her courage, skill, and decisive action had prevented disaster and saved countless lives. Closing suspense. As the helicopter banked away from the rooftop, Rachel's eyes flicked to the horizon, still scanning, still vigilant. She knew this day would not be the last test, that threats and dangers could arise again. But for now she had survived, triumphed, and acted with unwavering courage. The rooftop battle was over, the devices neutralized, the intruders contained. And yet, in the fog of uncertainty, one thought remained. In her line of duty, every second could demand the impossible.